Hello, thanks for joining us. My name is David Malone.
And my name is Ian Stroud. This is Hyperland.
On the show today, we have got my son, Ian Malone. We've asked him to come along and talk about the hydrogen economy because he's doing a PhD in the chemistry of hydrogen production. And when we were talking a couple of weeks ago, it suddenly occurred to me he knows quite a lot about what's going to unfold.
Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. Now, Ian, I thought I'd do a bit of research before, so I've downloaded a review of 11 hydrogen production and various storage and transport options. Okay. I got down to the first graph, and I didn't really understand it. And then I thought, well, Ian's coming on, so he can explain it all to us.
I'll do my best.
So look, do you want to tell us a little bit about what you're actually doing in the PhD, and then tell us a little bit about the meetings that you were going to? Because that was when I suddenly thought, we should get him on. Yeah,
sure. So my PhD is on a particular type of hydrogen generation method, which is it's called anion exchange membrane water electrolysis, which is a very long-winded name.
Well, this is why I got down to the graph and I went, this is beyond me.
Yeah, but in essence, I'm just trying to find a way to split water into oxygen and hydrogen using electricity, and try and do that in the most efficient way possible to make a lot of hydrogen and not have a device that breaks down.
Because a lot of the processes, they produce possibly the same amount of electricity than it takes to produce that hydrogen. Is that right?
So, well, it's an inherently inefficient process. So you're just putting electricity into this reaction
and getting the same amount,
getting hydrogen out.
Yeah.
But you'll have lost some energy along the way in terms of heat loss and other things.
So, but the process that you're looking at is more efficient than that.
It's trying to improve those efficiencies, but it's on one of these techniques, and I'm looking at the how durable the process is and trying to make the device that does this reaction last longer, so it's more commercially viable. Because ultimately, what we want to do is bring down the cost of hydrogen production.
How do we make hydrogen at the moment? Because we have got hydrogen. Do we do it in a sensible way?
So the main production at the minute, so there's about 90 million tons of hydrogen produced each year, which is and so that's for all applications in the chemical industry. Big one is ammonia production. So ammonia is NH3. And that's the main component that goes into fertilizer.
So that comes from bio-waste?
No, so that comes from, they get air, and then they liquefy it and basically distill it. So you get the nitrogen out of the air.
I've got you.
And then they get hydrogen, which is from this process called steam methane reforming. So what that is we take our methane, we take water, and then we basically heat them to really high temperature. And the methane, which is 1 carbon and 4 hydrogens, strips the hydrogen off that.
Right.
And then you're left with hydrogen and then lots of CO2. So much CO2, in fact, that for every kilo of hydrogen that you make 10 kilos of CO2. So that 90 million tons of hydrogen results in 900 million tons of CO2.
Wow.
And that's about 3% of the world's CO2 emissions.
So that's not going to go down too well with the climate activists.
No. It's a bigger, like that's almost twice as much CO2 as is produced by the whole of Canada, for example.
Okay, well, that's a bit bonkers then. So people having hydrogen cars thinking, yes, it's clean technology. It's actually a filthy technology given the way we're producing the hydrogen. If we could produce the hydrogen in a more sensible way, then it would be a clean technology. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah, pretty much. So any application of hydrogen that people are claiming as being clean, green, or whatever, if you're producing it from steam methane reforming, then it's not the case. Now, you may have heard these sort of colors of hydrogen. that people
green
talk about?
hydrogen.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
there's green, there's blue, and there's grey, and there's pink, and all these things.
I've heard of the grey one as well.
Right. So I don't know how useful those colours are. Because people then sort of saying, "Oh, which colour was that again?"
Yeah,
when you could
like
just talk about what it actually is.
It's like this. They say it's like the supermarket. It's good for you. Red. The traffic lights.
Kind of, yeah. So what I just described, the methane reforming, that's grey hydrogen. So that's
Right.
pretty bad. And the other bad one is what they call black, which is the same process, but rather than from methane, you're getting it from coal. So it's even dirtier.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. So they burn coal to make hydrogen?
Yeah, it's coal gasification.
Oh, coal. Right. Okay.
Yeah, you make syngas. So that's a mixture of hydrogen, carbon monoxide, and
That was one of the potty
methane.
things our government was trying to do offshore. It was all connected with fracking. They were going to do coal gasification underneath the sea, out off the North Sea.
All right, this is news to me. I mean, we used to do it all the time.
Yeah.
That was how all the gas that we burned was syngas. Now it's natural gas.
Yeah, that was when we had old town gas.
Exactly, yeah. So we were burning.
Yeah, well, you can
hydrogen,
rely on the
carbon
UK
monoxide.
government to go back to the oldest, filthiest technology at the drop of a hat. Okay, but anyway, let's try and move forward.
Yeah. So you got your grey and then your black. That's bad. Now there's what some companies are trying to do, and what's being pushed quite a lot is what's called blue hydrogen. So that is your steam methane reforming, but then you do carbon capture.
Yeah.
So then you store that CO2 somewhere. And there's a lot of money being put into this and big projects being put forward for this because the technology is supposedly more well established, but I'm not sure. I personally, my view is that the blue hydrogen is a bit of a waste of time and a waste of money.
Okay.
Because really, what you want is the green, and that's your hydrogen that's produced from water and through an electrochemical process. So water and renewable electricity. That's zero emissions.
There are aluminium involved in that as well.
No
Okay.
no aluminium.
All right, I'll show you. Okay, well, going forward then, if we get to a position where this greener case, there's other issues with storage and transportation, the network that we've got to get the energy out.
Yes. Yeah, so we got our generation. Green is clearly the way we want to be doing it. But then there's what do you actually want to use the hydrogen for?
Good question.
So there's a lot of talk about, fuel cells versus electric cars, or whether we want to use hydrogen in heating systems and all this kind of thing.
Yeah.
But first and foremost, my view is that we're already using 90 million tons of hydrogen for other things. So if we can actually decarbonize that to start with, that would be the place to begin. Really, exactly. Like we produce a tiny amount of hydrogen from green sources at the minute. So if we could get that all the way up to replacing the current production, then that's an easy thing to solve.
Why? I know I'm going backwards, but why are they pushing blue hydrogen? What is there a logic behind it?
Because people make a lot of money out of extracting methane.
Oh, there you go, David. There's your answer.
Well, I'm sure that's right.
Yeah.
Would they claim that it's sort of we need to do it in the short term or something?
Yeah. I mean, there is a point that the steam methane reforming process, it has been proven at scale. You can do a massive plant of one of these things. So to produce a lot of hydrogen very quickly, you would do that. The carbon capture side of things is less well established.
Okay,
but yeah, they would say to get the hydrogen economy going, you've kind of got this chicken and egg problem. So which is that no one wants to invest in technologies which utilize hydrogen because there's not enough made at them, and then nobody wants to build the electrolyzers because there's nobody who wants to use it yet. So
so they need to create the market. But the problem is the way we're producing hydrogen to build the market is so, as you said, produces huge amounts of carbon dioxide. So it's really, okay.
Yeah. And on the blue hydrogen, there was quite a good paper. I forget the name of the author now, but the title is "How Green is Blue Hydrogen?" And the conclusion is not very green. In fact, you're often better off. The point that he makes is you'd be better off just taking your methane and just burning that straight up that would be more efficient than taking your methane, stripping the hydrogen off it, capturing the carbon. Yeah.
Well, we'll find that report and put a link into the notes below.
Okay, so you're one of the people working on the next technology.
Yes.
Okay, so without going into too much technical
A bit
detail,
about that. Yeah.
just tell us how it might work and why it's better.
Okay. So with the green hydrogen, you got 3 different technologies for doing that. So the first one is called alkaline water electrolysis. This has been around for a really long time. It's well-established technique. You basically got two electrodes, your positive electrode, negative electrode, and at one of these you produce oxygen, and at the other one you produce hydrogen. And in between you've got an electrolyte, which is a really concentrated alkaline solution.
Yeah.
And these systems they're very cheap.
Yeah.
The catalysts that they use are like nickel and iron based.
Still no aluminium.
No aluminium.
You're going to have to give up on the aluminium. You're going to have to sell those shares. It's not going to.
Oh, if you want to get onto buying precious metals, I'll get onto that down the line. Yeah. But yeah, it's a very cheap process in terms of building a system, but the efficiency of the process is not very high. So when we want to produce, if we want to compete with the steam methane reforming, which is very well established technology, we need to bring down the cost of the hydrogen that's produced from the green sources.
Yeah.
So you need a more electrically efficient way to do that.
Is the efficiency the amount of electricity you have to shove into those electrodes to split the water to get the is that
exactly?
What it is?
Okay. Yeah.
So you need a way of doing it where you're not having to put so much electricity in, because you've got to generate that electricity by burning gas or coal or something.
Well, yeah. So I mean, the hope is that we'll be doing that using renewable electricity, which is currently cheaper than any other form of electricity.
Yeah.
And the more of that we have on tap, then that will bring down the cost as well.
Okay.
So you can actually lower the cost of your production without even changing your electrolyzer, just by having more cheaper electricity.
Okay, so we build more wind farms, and that's a big help.
That's,
then the electricity we're using is at least, as you say, renewable.
Exactly.
But now we want to get better electrolyzers. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So from the second type of electrolyzer, it's what's known as a PEM electrolyzer. So that stands for proton exchange membrane.
Okay.
So I'll try and explain that to you a little bit.
Is that what you're working on?
Not quite. I work on the third type.
Okay.
So the PEM electrolyzer, they're currently being commercialized. And what they have these 2 electrodes, much with the alkaline one, but instead of a liquid electrolyte between the 2, they have a solid polymer electrolyte. So it's like a thin sheet of cling film, basically.
Yeah.
But it's very fancy cling film.
Right.
Because it can conduct protons, so H+, so hydrogen ions, if you like, through it. So what that allows you to do is bring your electrodes really, really close together, and that reduces the resistance of the reaction. So if you've got low resistance, that means you need a lower electrical input to produce your hydrogen.
Yeah, good.
And there's a whole bunch of other advantages as well. But yeah, so that lowers the cost of your electricity.
Oh, that sounds great. What are you fiddling on with the third one for?
So
I think there's a but.
There is a but. So the disadvantage to this type of system is the type of catalysts that you need. So I said you need cheap nickel iron catalysts for the alkaline.
Yeah.
For this, you need platinum and iridium catalysts.
So I'm buying shares in platinum and
Iridium. Yeah, iridium's the one to go for. So for some perspective, I think it's $4,000 an ounce, roughly, for some just straight up iridium. And the reason for this is because there's so little in the Earth's crust, and it's actually distributed in a layer evenly across the Earth because it's only come from space.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That sounds like one of those asteroid impacts.
Yeah. I can't remember which one it came from. It might have been the one that killed the dinosaurs, but either way, it's in this particular layer called the iridium layer.
That is going to be a very, very thin layer then, isn't it?
Yeah, and it means that you can't mine it directly. So it comes as a byproduct from mining other things. It comes out as like an impurity, if you like. but that means the global amount of iridium mined each year is about a ton. So
Wow.
for how big that is, imagine an exercise ball.
Yeah.
That's how much iridium is mined each year.
Okay, there's gonna be a scramble for who owns that ball, isn't there?
Yeah, absolutely. And lots of companies are betting on that this technology won't be able to. We won't be able to build enough electrolyzers using this. However, others are saying, we can recycle this. We already do this for other precious metals.
Yeah.
For example, in catalytic converters. So we can reduce the amount of iridium that you need, but it doesn't get away from the fact that it's expensive.
Yeah. So the third one.
Tries to basically take the benefits of both of the previous technologies. So it's running in an alkaline environment again. So that means you can use the cheap catalysts, but we're also using a membrane. So it means you can keep your electrodes close together.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm working on, which is anion exchange membrane electrolysis. So anion, because rather than conducting H plus through the membrane, we're conducting OH minus. So it's a negatively charged ion. So in theory, this will bring down the cost because it's cheaper to build the device and it's cheaper to run the device.
So are you allowed to tell us? Well, tell us what you are allowed to tell us about where you are.
Yeah, so I'm. It's a very early stage technology. The main challenge with it is degradation. So you build a device, the performance just falls apart very quickly. So, it won't last very long. Certainly not for a commercial application.
Okay.
So people are working on new catalysts, new membranes, and it's kind of a lot of work carried out by chemists mostly in isolation. But there's not so many people trying to tie everything together and test a whole device. So that's really what I'm trying to do is do sort of full device testing and understand this degradation.
So have you actually built one?
Yeah. I've got some in the lab. Yeah. Very small, sort of five square centimeters. The power they suck back is about as much as a light bulb.
Right.
Yeah. It doesn't produce much hydrogen.
Does it work?
It works for a brief time, yeah. And you see the bubbles coming out. It's quite satisfying. And then very quickly the membrane just breaks down.
So is part of what you and others are doing is you're trying to find other chemicals that go on your membrane? Is that it? Are you trying different ones, or I mean, how are you planning on making this membrane last long enough to be a commercially viable thing?
Well, I mean, I'm not a polymer scientist, so I can't tell you exactly what membrane you're going to want to make. If I did know that, then I might have won the Nobel Prize already. But but yeah, it's about trying to find and test new membrane materials and understand the chemistry behind how these things are falling apart.
So if you're not making the membrane, which bit are you making? Or maybe you're not making it.
I'm not making it. I'm designing
he's putting
tests
it together.
Yeah, I'm testing and basically explaining to the people who make the membranes, for example, why their membranes are no good.
This is not working.
Yeah.
I can go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. So it's been a lot of designing tests and building devices, that sort of thing.
But you have the belief that this is the best method going forward.
I think so, yeah. What I will say, though, is that in terms of net zero and trying to actually solve climate change, this technology is still in the lab, so it's not going to solve climate change.
Yeah,
It's going to be the technologies that we already have, which are going to help us there. We'll need this in the future because we won't have enough iridium to last forever. But yeah, it's in terms of actually building systems and deploying them in the world, it's going to be the traditional alkaline and the PEM electrolyzers in the short term.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about this meetings you were going to, because what was of interest to me is it seemed like when we were chatting and when we last met down in London, that it seemed like the bunch of you, and tell us who it was, who were meeting up, you were beginning to sketch out what sounded to me like our energy policy for the nation that going forwards. That's how it sounds. So tell us a little bit about it and tell us if I was right about that or not.
So yeah, I guess as part of the PhD, you get access to different circles of discussion, whether it's from the sort of the pure science conferences where you're talking about the nitty gritty details of the chemistry, all the way up to more kind of policy type stuff. And yeah, I really got interested in that whole side of things. I think the whole applications side and how you could actually change the world for the better really inspires me.
Yeah.
So one of the meetings that I went along to, it was a energy storage policy masterclass.
Yeah.
And it felt like less of a masterclass and more of a revolutionary meeting with a great sense of urgency.
Well, that's encouraging.
It was.
What gave you that impression?
I'll try and paint you a bit of a picture. It was at the Institute for Mechanical Engineers, which I don't know if you know, but it's next. It's right near the Treasury, just off St James Park.
Yeah.
And it's right next to the Institute for Civil Engineers. The reason being was the guy who founded it, George Stevenson. They wouldn't let him in the Civil Engineering Institute, so he founded his own one right next door.
George Stevenson of
the steam trains. Yeah, that's right. That's the guy. So we go to this place, and it's this oak panelled room, big portrait of George on the wall, and yeah, you've got all these scientists and engineers and advisors to the government and various other organisations all having this heated debate about how we're going to implement energy storage and what the best way is to do that. And I was kind of thinking they're going to say stuff about batteries, about like pumped hydro storage, all these kind of things. And all they really talked about, the main thing was hydrogen.
Wow.
And they kept coming back to that in some way. And it was a question of how much hydrogen storage do we need? And nobody could agree. But what we could agree on is that we need some. So we should build some.
Okay, why do we need hydrogen storage? What's that got to do with a national energy policy?
So, yeah, for thinking about the electricity grid, you've got the producers and you've got the users, and that's a supply chain, but it's got zero inventory. So,
what does that mean?
So you always need to have your supply and demand balanced out perfectly. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart. So for any given moment, you need the exact amount of energy being used as is produced.
Oh, is that what they mean when they talk about balancing the grid?
Exactly, yeah. So in the past, it was quite easy. We had lots of coal-fired power stations, and they're very
predictable
to run. You can kind of ramp them up and down a bit, and it's
Oh, I got. So that's when they talk about that in the grid they were on standby when the FA Cup comes to half time and 21
everyone's making tea.
21 people boil the kettle, so they
fire up another.
So they have to
station.
be on the phone saying to the Magnox, right, ready, go, quick, switch it on.
Yeah, exactly.
Brilliant.
So that meant you had a system where your demand fluctuated a bit, but was on whole generally predictable. You could predict when people needed more electricity and not. But your supply, you had control over that.
Yeah.
Now we're moving to renewable electricity, and then you got your likes of wind and solar. So the supply becomes unpredictable as well.
Right.
So you need some way of smoothing out that supply and demand, because you'll have periods of excess supply, you'll have periods of
so that's storage.
Demand. Storage, yeah. So at the minute we just burn gas. So have some gas power stations on standby to smooth out the peaks and troughs. And then when we have too much electricity, just have to turn off the wind turbines. And then you've got some assets sat around doing nothing, which is a bit of a waste. So that's why you need storage.
So what we really need to build is large banks of batteries.
So, I mean, that's one idea, and certain countries are doing that. So Australia have done a bunch of that.
I think there's a lot in California as well, isn't there?
I think there are a lot in California. I think Tesla had some project out in Hawaii as well.
Yeah.
Problem with batteries is they're very expensive, and
the lifespan's not too good.
It's not too good. There's people working on much better technologies. That's another story of why those don't get implemented. The problem with the battery is it's a very expensive device to have sat around if it's not doing anything. So in terms of the peaks of supply and demand, a really good example of a long-term one is just winter heating.
Yeah.
So in the northern hemisphere, we use a hell of a lot more energy in the winter than we do in the summer. And that at the moment sort of met by gas mostly that we burn in the boilers.
Yeah.
But if you want if we're doing this all with renewable electricity, you can't have a bunch of batteries that you only discharge once a year and recharge once a year. That would just be phenomenally expensive. So where hydrogen could come in on this is you have electrolyzers.
Yeah.
And you run them using surplus renewable electricity.
In the summer, when it's sunny.
Exactly. Yeah. Or when there's too much wind, whatever.
Yeah.
And then they produce hydrogen, which you store. And the best solution we have for that at the minute is salt caverns. There's a lot in East Yorkshire, actually.
Yeah.
Massive things, several times the size of St. Paul's, many miles underground. So you can put a lot of gas down there, and then you save that for when you need.
That makes sense.
Need it.
So I remember there was a big argument broke out. I think it was in Ireland where there was plans to open up these salt caverns. And I think there was a lot of opposition because as I remember, I might be getting this wrong, but there was a worry that they would use the salt caverns the way they have, like the ones down in Cheshire, just basically for pumping toxic waste in. But obviously storing hydrogen in them would be a lot better use of those salt caverns.
Yeah, I think so.
So wait a minute. So you produce the hydrogen. How do you produce the hydrogen? You put your electrolyzer or the one we currently have. What do? Do you just sort of bolt it onto every wind turbine?
That's one idea. There's people working on putting electrolyzers on wind turbines and out at sea. So you sort of have an integrated kind of solution.
Wow.
So that's one idea. There's a project that's going on at the minute. I think it's SSE and Equinor, just north of Hull. They've got the wind farm off on the Dogger Bank.
Oh, the huge one, yeah.
Yeah, the one that's sort of coming on in various phases. It's the biggest one in the world, I believe.
Yeah, I think when it comes on, it will. I mean, Britain is already very high up in terms of renewable from wind, and I think when Dogger 1, 2, 3, and 4 is, I think we become the number one.
Yeah, I can't. Who was it? Was saying that we want to become the Saudi Arabia of wind or something like that.
All we have to do is connect up to get the wind coming out of the House of Lords and the Commons. Never mind. I thought that's when you said blue hydrogen. I imagined that's what it was. We're just going to suck the hot air out of the House of Commons and we'd be sorted.
Probably would sort you out. So this project, they've got the wind farm there. They've got the salt caverns, which are local, and then they're going to just have a station where you have a bunch of electrolyzers, tap off the electricity from the wind farm, and then just pump the hydrogen straight down underground. And then they've got, I think, a gas turbine, which is not the most efficient way of using your hydrogen, but it works okay. And they can just feed that into there when they need to top up the grid.
And the oxygen, which is the other half of what's coming out of the electrolyzer, presumably you just squirt that out into the ocean.
Yeah, that just goes up in the air. I mean, oxygen is valuable, but it's, for most projects, it's going to be too much of a faff to actually capture that. I mean, for example, hydrogen is actually produced from when they do the chloralkali process, where for producing sodium hydroxide and other sort of alkali substances. They produce a hell of a lot of hydrogen from that, but they don't capture it because the sodium hydroxide is so much more valuable that it's not worth their time to actually use that hydrogen.
Extend that process.
So they just get rid. That's just the nature of how chemical processes kind of work, or how humans design processes in general.
Then, if this, what were they saying about this? I mean, at the moment, you painted a picture of this happening in the lab, but at this meeting, what was the nature of the discussion about this then?
The nature of the discussion was very much, we need to build this now, and we need to find a way of talking to government and making things happen. The other stuff I hear is that there's basically a lot of money that's ready to go into this, and I think it would have moved sooner if there'd been more of a strategy from government, but it seems that now it's going to be moving regardless. So I think the government's kind of going to be left behind in some ways on this.
So who was at this meeting when you say those people wanted it to happen? Were they the scientists, your bosses, the top scientists? Were there people from industry there? When you say there's money ready, was that industry money? And were there any people from government there? You said there were civil servants. So is anyone from government getting this message?
I can't remember how many people from government there were. I don't think there were many. Especially not from the likes of the Treasury. Apparently, they're notoriously hard to get hold of.
That's because they're always too busy bailing out their mates at the banks.
Yeah.
They're busy. When banks collapse that frequently, it's a lot of paperwork.
I'm sure. But yeah, it was mostly people with a background in either academia or industry, but they were very senior in their roles and have various advisory positions. So I would say they would be categorized as the experts, and in terms of how the media would talk about them.
And what about industry? Were they there?
Yeah, industry were there. They're all ready to go. They're making lots of sales already. Lots of plans going ahead. So
if a minister or someone from the Treasury could pull themselves away from their extraordinarily important work, was it your impression that the scientists in the industry would say, "Look, here's a plan. Give us a guarantee that there's going to be national backing for this, and we're off"?
Yeah. I think that's the main concern, is that people want a bit more certainty in terms of what the plan is, because there's lots of different directions to go in. One of the things that comes up a lot is the discussion on what's the best way of transmitting your energy. So do you want to send it in a pipe, or do you want to send it through a cable?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask next.
Okay,
the transportation of this. How does it come into my house?
Exactly. So the government are quite on board at the minute with the idea of putting hydrogen in the gas grid, basically. And I think they've got projects around Leeds and other places to pilot this. This, I'm not sure, is a great idea, really. Basically, because actually producing your hydrogen and then having to maintain something to distribute that and then burn it on the other end is going to be way less efficient than just using electricity, which is produced as electricity, transmitting that through a cable and then using it in that same form.
Okay, well, either way, I mean, if it's gas, that you've got to pump it in there under pressure, and you're going to have to upgrade the pipe network, because these figures are old, but I remember seeing figures that said up to a quarter of the gas that goes into the gas system leaks out into the ground.
Yep.
So that you'd have to solve that, and there's an awful lot of pipes down there.
Yeah.
And they've got to be maintained under pressure. I mean, once it gets to your house, it's easy, because if I remember rightly, when we moved from town gas to natural gas, they had to replace all the little nozzles in everyone's cookers and boilers. And if they've saved those little nozzles, we can just put them back in, because it's the old gas town nozzles that we need for hydrogen.
I wouldn't count on that. But
It'd be lovely if someone, Bert, go and open up that cupboard again and get those 450 million little nozzles. We need them back. You might need to polish each one. All right, but so it's that, or you've got to burn it and then have the problems of distribution in the high tension cables anyway, where you've got to have it at a high voltage. Why are they going for the gas? I mean, I know you don't know, but what's your guess?
So my guess with the gas is the main parties that are pushing this are the current gas grid operators.
Oh, surprise!
And current gas boiler makers. They're already selling hydrogen-ready boilers and this sort of thing. It seems to me, and to others as well. I think there was a report published on this sort of pipe versus cable argument, and 35 different bodies basically came to the conclusion that putting it in a pipe is a bad idea, basically, in terms of the efficiency. But they seem to be going down this route, and I think it is I think the public are probably being missold on that.
But you did sort of say that there isn't the customer base out there at the moment.
Yes, well, the government could just basically say, right, we're putting hydrogen in the gas grid, so that's going to create a big demand for hydrogen.
Yeah.
But I guess my worry is that people don't really know necessarily about these changes that are happening, and they always say, we want to give people choice and consumer freedom and all this sort of stuff, but you don't get to decide what gets put in the pipe that's sent to your house, and that's going to limit you as to what fuel you can use to heat your home, And then you'll be tied into the costs that are associated with that. And if that's inherently more expensive than using electricity, then you're not getting a choice in that. Someone's just imposing that.
Down, are they?
Exactly, yeah. And I don't think people are aware of that, that it could be a lot more expensive doing it this way. I don't think it's fully clear, the picture, but I think it's a discussion that should be more public.
Okay, because presumably, obviously, the people who own that enormous infrastructure, what used to be British Gas, and all of the boiler makers and all of the plumbers, if we decide not to put the hydrogen in there, then they're faced the same problem that the oil producers have, that a lot of their infrastructure and a lot of what they own declines very rapidly in what it's actually worth, and eventually it just becomes like old horseshoes after we've invented the car.
Yeah,
no one needs them.
It'd be like if you decided to go for full electrification, then it would be like a Beechings type decommissioning of the gas grid.
Right, but on the other hand,
getting rid of all the pipes.
If we go for electricity, then everyone's got to buy a new cooker, and you're going to need you don't necessarily have to get rid of your old boiler, because there is that technology which I saw, which I thought was interesting when I saw it. A company saying we would be able to retrofit into all of your old gas boilers, which heat water in pipes, but use a microwave insert. So all of that infrastructure in your house stays as it is, but you take out the gas burning bit and put in a microwave bit, which will run off electricity. But would we also then all need new? I hate electric cookers. I'm not a very good cook as it is, but when it's not on, it's not on. Oh, it's molten hot and it's burnt.
Well, I mean, yeah, I prefer a gas cooker, but they have gotten a lot better. The one that I've got in my flat at the minute it's not actually that bad. And induction is very good, but you would have to invest in new devices for people's homes, like the heat pumps, for example. I know there's a lot of contention about that, and I'm no expert in this, but from what I can see, the technology is definitely a very good one, but its implementation is not necessarily always the best. A heat pump, for example, is very, very efficient because you're taking heat from the outside, so it is more than 100% efficient.
Wait a minute, it can't be more than 100. It can't even be 100% efficient. Never mind 100% efficient. Otherwise, we've got a perpetual motion machine. But it's more efficient.
Well, it's not creating the heat for it's just concentrating the heat.
Yeah.
So you're not having to generate new heat.
No, but it's basically like a fridge, but in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just reverse the two coils, and you've got the warm coil inside.
Yeah, but it does work out as way, way cheaper to heat at home.
Yeah,
if
exactly.
It's implemented correctly.
Yeah, if it's implemented, the problem is old leaky houses don't work so well with heat pumps. If you've got a house like ours, which
you need to invest in good insulation. It doesn't need to be a sealed box by any means, but yeah. Anyway, we're kind of getting off my topic of expertise.
Yeah. So what about the electrical side then?
Yeah. So I guess you'd have the problems of having to change all your appliances, this sort of stuff, to be fully electrified. However, you'd then be able to take advantage directly of the cheaper renewable electricity, which we're going to be implementing. Whereas if you're having to go through hydrogen and all of that sort of process for everything, that's going to add a lot of cost.
So just to get that right, then it's you're producing the electricity through hydrogen at source, and then the electricity is being transferred. So we're not even looking at the transportation of hydrogen
for that second system. Yeah. So you've got a choice between, if you're putting hydrogen in the grid, they're basically saying we're going to take that cheap renewable electricity. Convert as much as possible into hydrogen, or however much you need to feed our current demand for gas. Now, and then the other way of looking at it is saying, right, let's try and electrify as much as possible.
Yeah.
Use that renewable electricity directly to power everything. And then we know that they will need to do some balancing, but we can do that just with hydrogen stored in and the hydrogen doesn't have to go anywhere.
Yes,
it just has to.
That was
it can just stay there. I mean, you might need to. I don't know. It's not clear necessarily where your renewable energy will be created and where your hydrogen needs to be stored. So you'll have to do some sort of transportation in there, maybe. But there's a lot less than distributing it to everybody.
Yeah. So if you're pumping it into the big caverns to use when the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing, what you then do is suck the hydrogen back out
and convert it back into electricity
in a big electricity plant.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so you're not sending it to Mrs. Miggins's house.
Yeah.
You're burning it somewhere central.
Yeah.
And then putting the electricity in the same high tension cables we've got.
Yeah, and it's much more efficient to consume your hydrogen on a large scale like that than it would be in lots of little boilers.
Ian, can I ask another question?
Yeah.
I'd been reading about the grid, and apparently there's billions of projects that are waiting to be connected to the grid. There seems to be an issue with that. Is that something
what sort of projects?
I don't. Yes.
Oh well, wait a minute.
Like production, electricity production.
Yeah.
Quite possibly. I'd believe that.
Well, we were talking a while ago about the big solar farms, and I heard someone else speaking about wind farms in China, that they're building these things like nobody's business, and the statistics of how many they've got look great. But when we were talking, and I heard someone else saying this about wind farms, so many of them are not connected.
Yeah, I've heard this about China as well, and I haven't read anything concrete, but I think they don't necessarily have a joined up thinking in terms of how they're going to integrate everything. And then somebody's just said, right, we need to have lots of renewable energy, so build all these things. But I mean, as we were saying about the balancing of a grid, you can have the problem of having too much.
And you're on this. You are in the position of this planning of the grid. So the grid needs a lot of updating.
It needs a lot of replanning. Yeah, and this is sort of what's being discussed. And another thing with the balancing is, so having more electricity generation is great, but you don't want to have too much, and actually having more. So I think there's going to be an interesting report out soon from the Royal Society, which is all about this storage stuff. And this was what was being discussed at this meeting in part. But you can have too much generation because it would be more expensive to have more generation, which you have to turn on and off, than it would be to have a bigger storage cavern, for example. So, and I think what this report is, which will come out soon from the Royal Society, looked at was how wind fluctuated over a really long period. So I think it was about 40 years, something like that.
We're getting a lot more stronger wind now, aren't we?
Yeah, but it really fluctuates, apparently. You can have sort of 10 years where the wind is less than the previous 10. So if you only looked at a short time scale, you could end up building a lot more capacity for generation or a lot less capacity, and you'd find yourself in a situation where you wouldn't have enough capacity.
Okay, so wait a minute.
So you've got to make sure your store is big enough to account for that.
I was going to say, then, when you talk about storage, we're not talking about overnight storage.
No, we're talking about maybe 10 years of storage.
10 years? Wait a minute. 10 years of what? Surely you're not talking about being able to store enough hydrogen to power even a town for 10 years, are you?
We're talking about, I think I've got the numbers here. Yeah, you're going to need many hundreds of terawatts hours of storage.
Hundreds of terawatts. So wait a minute. That would mean that they're talking about being able to store the energy that would power the country for a little while.
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be in a situation where you can cover for those periods of where you don't have a lot of generation, for a long period. But you've also got to be in a situation where, imagine you've got the wind drops to zero and it's dark. You've got to be able to produce all of your electricity from stored sources as well.
They're going to need to put that hydrogen, even in caverns that are 4 times the size of St. Paul's. They're going to need to be under pressure.
Yeah, that's another thing they're looking at too. Actually, you can think about your storage on different timescales. So the hydrogen will be good for a longer term storage. Batteries will be great for your sort of hour-to-hour fluctuations, switch on and off really quickly, rapid charge and discharge. And then stuff that comes in the middle, there's various technologies, and I think one is think it's compressed air. So you could use that on the hydrogen, potentially compress the hydrogen. So basically you put energy in to compress it, and then you take the energy out when you release that pressure.
Oh,
and you can also take advantage of the heating and cooling effects that you get from that.
Right,
That's quite an efficient
this
way of
reminds
storing
me
energy.
of when they, in places like France and Switzerland, where they use electricity at night to pump water up into the mountains.
Yeah.
And the Swiss use this to cheat, because the Swiss claim that all their electricity is, or some huge proportion is all, it's all hydroelectric, it's all green. What they don't say, and this is the truth, is that they buy from Germany electricity produced by burning German coal to pump their water up, but they don't tell you that bit. So it's actually bollocks. In those discussions, does it look to you, I mean, obviously, you're just a couple of years into a PhD, and it's amazing to me that you're even invited along, but are we beginning to see the embryonic form of a national power policy emerging in those discussions? Because if the industry is saying this is what we can build, this is what we're going to invest in, and the scientists are saying this doesn't work, this will, this works now, this might work in 10 years' time, then whichever government gets in power, there's going to be certain questions which industry will say, nope, that doesn't work. It'd be like Yes Minister, where the minister walks in and goes, right, well, we're going to do this. And Sir Humphrey goes, no, Minister, we're not. We're going to do this instead.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think there's a lot of concern about which way it's going to go and how quickly it's going to happen. I think one way or another it is going to happen. The ball's rolling and it can't be stopped. There's going to be a transition. We're going to end up in a better place.
Well, I certainly hope so. Listen,
Yeah.
Ian, thanks very much for talking to us. Keep spreading that water. Give us some hydrogen. We need you to get back to work. In fact, what are you doing here?
Back to the lab.
Thanks, Ian.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed it, please leave a review.
And if you'd like to leave a comment, which would be great, we've set up a Hyperland Substack. So go to Substack, look up Hyperland, leave us a comment. We'd love to know what you think. And if you've got ideas that we should cover, that would be great too. Thanks a lot.
Brilliant. Thank you.